Andrew Ludington, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Thank you very much, Terrence. Nice to meet you.
It is a pleasure. I am so happy when I can schedule a podcast with someone that lives in the Midwest because the whole time zone thing throws me for such a loop. I'm like, Central Time, how hard is it? But the amount of times I've confused Eastern and Pacific time is more often than I'd care to admit.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I totally get it. And I've been doing a number of interviews
Hmm.
with people West Coast, East Coast, so I always check. Do you mean Central Time or do you mean some other time zone? So I really don't want to be an hour late for something or 2 hours early.
Hmm. I mean,
Yeah,
quite the irony for the fact that we're talking about a book that's about time travel.
that's true. That's true. I want to be precise. I want to reach my decay point.
Yes, okay. We have to talk Splinter Effect. And I told you before I hit record, I'm going to struggle to restrain some of my enthusiasm for this book because I just need to tell you the story of how I came across Splinter Effect. First and foremost, for those watching at home, this is the cover. It's amazing. It's incredible. The marketing that you guys have done for this book is spot on because I was lying in bed with the flu, scrolling Facebook, and I saw an ad for Splinter Effect. And just looking at the cover, I went, this is a book I desperately need to read. When I clicked the button to read more about it, I went, this is a book I desperately need to interview the author. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
So first and foremost, would you mind sharing a bit of your biography with the audience?
Sure, sure. I was born and raised in Southeast Michigan, in and around Detroit. My mother and my sister and I moved a lot as my mom chased work. So we experienced a lot of Southern Michigan over over the elementary through high school days, settling for the most part at the all through high school in South Lyon, Michigan, which is between Ann Arbor and Detroit.
Hmm.
Go South Lyon. I have lots of great friends who are still my friends from high school. Went to college in Central Ohio at Kenyon
Hmm.
College, which is a small liberal arts school in the Great Lakes College Association. Fantastic school. Had a wonderful education there. Then I moved out to Chicago, and I came here to be an actor, actually.
Oh, really? Wait, how?
Yeah,
I'm genuinely curious. Chicago is not where I immediately think of acting.
I know. But what I wanted to do was get some stage acting under my belt,
Okay. Hmm.
probably do the Second City program,
Hmm.
and then move to LA, feeling a little more like I had some professional experience, feeling a little more confident in what I was going to do once I got out to LA. But I tried it for a while and pretty quickly decided, yeah, I don't think this is for me.
Hmm.
So so I
I,
stopped.
I actually have a question with that because I remember I read Meinster's book on acting,
Hmm.
and I was fascinated with the way that character is developed as an actor. When you are, these are the lines on screen that you have on page. This is how I translate them into my performance. Do you have any of that residual that you feel like comes out in your writing?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do. And I frequently when I'm writing a character, I'll think about the way they move. I'll think
Hmm.
about their mannerisms. I'll
Hmm.
think about what the relational capital is between the two
Yeah.
people talking, what the power structure is between them.
Hmm.
And I don't think I'm alone as a writer in doing that. It's not that that's
Hmm.
unique to somebody who's been an actor, but I think about it from sort of an embodied way. How would I
Yeah.
do it if I were acting it?
Which I like just reading Splinter Effect, uh, you do have a kinetic way that you write where you feel the actors, I would say actors, you feel the characters in motion, which I know, at least personally in my writing, is something that I've always struggled more with because I very much approach it from just top-down analytical. This is like the cerebral element of it all, and don't really think of the body in movement or motion. And I just find that fascinating.
Interesting. That's very high compliment. I appreciate that. And it's true. I really do sort of feel
Hmm.
I wanted to make sure that my voice was warmed up a little bit before we got on. So I pulled up a page and I read the short chapter with the London Archaeologist. I just read
Hmm.
it out loud just to warm up my voice.
So good.
And the whole time I'm thinking about like him leaning forward because he's
Hmm.
so enthusiastic and desperately wants Rabbit to help his career.
I have to say that's probably I let's just start talking about Splinter Effect. You pace it beautifully, where we have this great big adventure moment at the beginning, and then we come down a little bit into the setup of the story. But you have earned so much of our interest that not only, even if it wasn't an interesting like setup to the rest of the adventure, it would still be entertaining because you do very well that thing that happens in like Law and Order, where when people are talking and telling you stuff to the audience, they're doing stuff. They're moving. They're actually doing things that keep you interested on the page besides just getting, oh, this is your nugget of exposition.
Thank you. One of my one of my favorite scenes to write and still to read even. When
Hmm.
I look back through it as I've had to do, copy edits and things like
Yes.
that. I love the scene that takes place at the Kennedy Center.
Hmm.
I love that scene. And it's not an action scene.
Hmm.
It's not it's a scene with mostly expository information, but I loved writing it. And it was to me, it felt so visceral, his discomfort at being there.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed Splinter Effect. Tell us a little bit about where did the story start?
Well, I actually had the idea for the story long ago. Just that hook. What if there was a time traveling archaeologist?
Hmm.
Um,
Great
when
high
I was,
concept, by the way. Just
Thank you,
brilliant.
thank you. And one of the things that when I started to write it, I thought, okay, what excites me about this idea, in addition to the fact that I'm excited about the story,
Hmm.
is that it's something that one reader could tell another reader in a
Hmm.
sentence or two.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's the kind of book that I'm most likely to be attracted to when someone tells me about
Hmm.
it.
Yes.
Um, but like I remember somebody telling me about Gone Girl, and they described it in a sentence or two, and I thought,
Hmm.
I've got to read that book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which,
But so origin wise,
yeah.
was as actually your question. Uh, I was in elementary school through college. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, I was always the dungeon master anytime I could be because I wanted to make the story and I wanted to
Hmm.
play all of the characters who weren't the player characters.
The sign that you're a writer at an early age.
Yeah, yeah. And I would come up with these very elaborate storylines to run people through on these campaigns. Well, I had the idea a little too late. It was probably just as I was graduating from college, I had the idea, oh, make a really great role-playing game
Hmm.
to have a cast of the players being time traveling archaeologists. And so I sat on that idea for a couple of decades. Um, and then in 2020,
Hmm.
my wife and I had a trip scheduled to Rome
Hmm.
in April.
Great timing.
Great timing. Great timing, right? So, right about March, I think, beginning of March is when the full travel bans came on
Yes.
and we had to cancel everything. So, I was moping around the house and feeling sorry for myself that I wasn't in Rome. And and that idea came back to me and I started thinking, well, wait a minute, that would actually make a really good that would make a potentially good novel.
Hmm.
Um, so I started fleshing it out. I started building out the characters around it and the structure around the idea. But the idea came first.
Hmm. If it was just the high concept idea, it would still be noteworthy. But the fact that you deliver a very good story is what elevates it so beautifully. Like I said, this is a book that I will be telling my friends and family about because not just time traveling archaeologists. If I just said that, admittedly because of my tastes, my friends and family go, "Oh, of course, this is a book that Terrence likes." But as they see, like I've got my fedora, my Stetson fedora in the back and all that stuff. But because it's a genuinely well written story with riveting scenes, I just am so excited about this book. Like, just genuinely, I enjoyed it. And you wrote an article for Criminal Element about genre. And I thought that was
Hmm.
really interesting given the fact that Splinter Effect has an interesting like cross genre nature. And I want to ask you a little bit about this because adventure fiction doesn't tend to it seems to struggle to find a spot on the shelf with
That's
genre.
true.
And I'm genuinely curious, was that a thought in your mind writing Splinter Effect? And what genre would you play Splinter Effect in?
Yeah. So yes, it was in my thought, and I was thinking about very naively when I wrote this book. I thought, oh well, because it has some elements of sci-fi, it's got this adventure story, it's got a lot of rich history
Hmm.
explored in it. I thought, oh, this will appeal to lots of people, and I hope it does.
Hmm.
But I also acknowledge now that my publisher was very brave actually in buying the first two
Hmm.
books in this series because this can be a little touch and go in marketing,
Hmm.
and some of the early galley readers, I think, came into it thinking, oh, this is going to be, I've looked at the cover and I'm
Hmm.
expecting straight action scenes from start to finish. And they say, what's with all the history, man?
You know, a book that has to do with archaeology. How dare there be history?
Which, I get that's where the genre comes in, though, right? I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
people do kind of have this set of genre expectations that they come into a book with, and if they're really attached to those genre expectations, it can be disappointing. I'm
Hmm.
hoping that people will approach the book um, with an open mind and say, okay, well, this is a story.
Hmm.
It's going to meet some of my expectations for sci-fi. It's going to meet some of my expectations for historical thriller, etc.
Hmm.
So,
Again, I think you deliver very well on each one of those elements, though, because when you are in the past, it feels so very real. I'm a big fan of, actually, so ironically enough, my wife was taking a class on Western Civ 1, Western Civ 2, something like that, at the same time. So as she's having to read about the Byzantine era, I'm sitting there going, oh, honey, you're going to have to read this book when you're done
wow, okay, nice
just because
timing.
again it feels very of you write the time so well and I'm genuinely curious was there what did the research look like coming up with okay this is the history what facts were you really concerned about getting right and were there just some things where like it doesn't need to be this specific.
Yeah. So there were some elements where there was just things that were important to the story. I had
Hmm.
to get something across for the story. But the other part was I wanted readers to feel like they had visited this place. I wanted people to feel like, and that's, for me, one of the fun parts about the story is
Hmm.
you're not seeing this historical world through the eyes of a native. You're seeing it through the eyes of a tourist,
Hmm.
basically, somebody like us, and who would be noticing. A rabbit would be noticing things about that period, even though he studied it. He would
Hmm.
still be seeing things firsthand, and they would strike him as interesting. And
Hmm.
so anything where I thought, okay, this would catch rabbit's attention, then I'd include more information. Um, but the research is an interesting angle because there aren't a ton of primary sources
Yeah.
about sixth century Rome. There's lots written about it, but
Hmm.
it's not like if you look back at first century Rome,
Hmm.
there are a lot more primary sources to read. Sixth century, not as many. So my golden rule in researching was, if I find out it happened, um, then great. That gives me something I might use, I might not use. Um, but if I see it written, especially in a primary source, I won't contradict that primary source
Hmm.
because I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. Time travel is one of those genre conventions that everyone kind of has a take to a certain degree on. I mean, even when you watch Endgame, Avengers Endgame, they have set up time travel, and then these are the rules, which
Hmm.
then the suspense comes from. testing the boundary of that rule. What was that like coming up with your own rules for time travel? Did you have a particular, oh, this was an influence that I really like drew from to come up with my construction of it?
So my my primary aim in creating my rules was I didn't want there it to be possible for somebody to go back and influence the present.
Hmm.
Um, and so you've probably heard this phrase. I love this phrase, one by sci-fi.
No, I haven't heard that phrase.
So it's science fiction where you only need to buy into one thing. Um, so basically, if you get the idea of a splinter,
Hmm.
you're pretty much good for the book.
Hmm.
I'm not, the book doesn't ask you to accept a lot more. Now, spoiler, it is going to be a series. And so that gives me the opportunity to introduce more complications to those
Hmm.
rules going forward. Um, but I really wanted to make sure that there were there were no second chances on a mission.
Hmm.
If the mission, the mission parameters are set, you go back, you do the mission, you're successful or you fail, and failure is very, very dangerous. So I wanted to introduce that kind of risk
Hmm.
um, without the. I never wanted my readers to say, "Yeah, why doesn't he just go back again and fix it?"
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of that, the he in the story, Rabbit Ward, which again, great name because it evokes time travel, it evokes sci-fi, but it also has like a good adventurer feel. What was it like designing him as a character? Because I think that it's pretty easy for when you start saying, oh, time traveling archaeologist. It's like, okay, we start with Indiana Jones and we just tweak a few things, but you didn't do that. What was your creation for the character?
Thank you. So I love Rabbit. He's such a fun character, right? But what I started with him was I thought, okay, here's a guy who is really good at his job.
Hmm.
I mean, he's somebody who can fade into the background drop him into any space within probably 800 years and he'll be fine. Um,
Talk
and
about men prepared.
yeah, yeah. He speaks six ancient languages as well as several modern ones. Um, he's, quick with his fists. He's facile at lying. He's just very, very good at his job. And I thought, okay, that's really boring. I don't want to read a book about somebody who's good at everything.
Hmm.
So I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. So what's he bad at? Well, if you're really good at your job and you've been doing your job for a couple of decades,
Hmm.
um, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself. You're probably feeling a little entitled. Uh, and so, he's gruff. He bites the hand that feeds him. He criticizes the rules and guidelines that are structured around time travel because they're not well enforced. Um, because he basically feels like he has the ability to be critical because he's successful,
Hmm.
which is great until he stops being successful, and then
This
fine.
describes an academic so well.
Yeah. And once he's no longer successful, he finds, and this isn't really a spoiler, it comes up very early in
Hmm.
the story. He finds that what's the Jimmy Carter quote? I didn't come here to make friends, and he didn't. That Rabbit does not have a lot to fall back on because he hasn't cultivated this network of people who support him. He's got his core group
Hmm.
with whom he has excellent friendships. But he has some challenges just dealing with his own career.
Hmm.
Uh, he's also terrible with women, and he is he's riddled with guilt because
Hmm.
of something that happened to him long ago that he can't change, can't control, and that has racked him for a long time, and he's very defensive about it. So when I came up with that sort of person behind all of the
Hmm.
skill, I thought, well, that's somebody I want to read about.
Yeah. There's a delicious irony to a time traveler that feels guilt about the past because it sits right there within our emotions so well. And especially there's he is well written. He's a delightful character. You feel the challenges and the pain when he has to grovel looking for handouts and sponsorships. Because again, I think that all of us to a certain level have experienced where we need to ask for something and we desperately don't want to, but need to appeal to the people that can give us what we want. So
Yeah.
again, I remember one of the books on character that I've read, one of the premises was you want to make them, I think it was Matt Bird's Secrets of Character.
Hmm.
Ideally, in setting up a character in the beginning, you want to kind of show them up. You want to give them an opportunity to be embarrassed because embarrassment is something that we personally feel on such an intimate level. And he, in the book, uses James Bond as the example. In the beginning of Dr. No, he's asked, his boss says, "Oh, that gun you used is stupid. Give me the gun. No, no, you can't like sneak away with your gun. Give me the gun." And
Hmm.
you do a great job in Rabbit having that moment of I failed, and it's just so repulsive to him, and then finding out, oh no, there are consequences to this to a degree he didn't expect.
Yeah. Yeah. Which for me is, I think it makes him, it's otherwise he'd be very hard to relate to.
Hmm. No, and
Uh,
that's true. Strong characters are difficult to relate to
mhm.
unless you see the that bit behind the armor.
Yeah. Yeah. And frankly, we all have them, right? No matter
Yes.
how good our armor is, inside we're all pretty squishy.
Mm. Which, okay, like, was that also a conscious thought in naming him Rabbit? Because a rabbit isn't a creature that you naturally think of as intimidating, or even like you didn't name him Fox or Todd or anything that denoted this cleverness. Instead, a rabbit is a defenseless creature that is prey to everything.
Hmm. Yes. So and I found the name actually on a gravestone in a local cemetery.
Oh, that's
Uh,
so cool.
Different last name, but same first name, was Rabbit O'Leary. And
Hmm.
I thought, great first name for this character. It's prey. It's somebody who is darting around trying to avoid capture and death. I thought that's got a good ring to it. Um, yeah, I really didn't want to give him a heavy machismo name. And it's a nickname too. So he could have
Hmm.
dropped it at any point, but he kept it.
It works so well for the character, and it's a really fun I don't want to say trope, but having him have a nickname that he has obviously willingly kept says a lot about who he is as a character. It informs more
Mhm.
of the world, and we as people have nicknames, so it makes sense that if he's a real person, there'd be some kind of nickname, and Rabbit to Robert really does work well.
I thought so. Thank you.
Mhm.
Did you ever have a nickname?
Well, I still have the nicknames. Since my name is Terrence, I'm called T. Take any variation of T that you want to make, and I haven't called it. That's just
Okay.
the nature of my nickname. Like,
Uh-huh.
question for you then, was it Andy or Drew?
Andy. Yeah, it's a mix. Most people in the work sphere call me Andy. Most people in my personal life, or sorry, other way around. Most people in my work sphere call me Andrew. Most people in my personal life call me Andy.
Okay, question then. My mom calls my dad by his full given name. Is that the same
Oh.
case between you and your significant other?
No, no, no. She
Okay.
she calls me. Honestly, she has a million nicknames for me. She has more nicknames for me than anyone else. Um, but I mean, you talk about like what a nickname says about you. Two of the elementary schools I went to,
Hmm.
were no connection between any of the other kids on the playground. Um, they came up with Uncle Andy, and people called me Uncle Andy at two different elementary schools because I was like a 8, 9 year old man.
I have a desperate need for a future book in the Splinter Effect series to have one Rabbit's uncle be like Uncle Andy. It's just like
That'd be good.
a comment, it's just a cameo. That would be brilliant.
That would be good. I might do that.
In a previous interview, you had a great comment that I thought was fun because we've kind of discussed this a little bit on the show before. But Indiana Jones as a character is kind of flat without Harrison Ford's
Yeah.
inherent charisma to bring him to present. That
Hmm.
kind of made me want to ask, did you have an actor in mind when you were thinking of Rabbit in person?
That's a great question. No. And I've been asked by many people, well, who would you want to play Rabbit and Helen in the movie? I have a really hard time with Rabbit. I don't know. I feel like we got more of an angle on Helen, actually.
Who do you think would play Helen well?
I think Gal Gadot
Yes.
would
Oh,
be really good
yes.
at Helen.
The character she played in that film with The Rock and Ryan Reynolds, like Red
Yes.
Notice, I think it was called,
Yeah.
that inherently, like the moment that's kind of that dynamic that she has would
Hmm.
be brilliant, especially the being able to kind of walk into any time period.
Right. And I didn't, seeing Wonder Woman, I thought, that didn't wouldn't have struck me from the, sort of clenched jawed seriousness of that role. But yes, she's capable of that kind of quick, snappy
hmm
uh, angle. Yeah, I think she'd be good at.
I love when the characters in a story feel that viscerally real that you could have a meal or a conversation with them. Although I sometimes wonder if it would end in arguments depending on the person. Because let's face it, again, characters that make characters in stories don't tend to be the people like James Bond. You don't want to have a meal with them. Rabbit, I'd be worried. I don't have enough money to sponsor one of his events, so he's not going to talk to me for very long.
That might be true. Yeah, I think Rabbit would be a really good friend,
hmm
but a very poor acquaintance.
Yes, that accurately describes him. In a treasure hunting novel, in a story where there's an object, a MacGuffin at the center of it,
Hmm.
a lot of the story twists on what that object is. Take any paperback Indiana Jones novel or any other adventure story. It hangs on what that MacGuffin is to kind of focus the world of the plot. You did not pick an obvious, oh, it's the Ark of the Covenant type artifact. What made you decide to pick this menorah?
Couple of reasons. So I knew that from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to make Rabbit a specialist in the classical Mediterranean, ancient and classical Mediterranean. So I
hmm
knew that was my playing field.
hmm
And he refers to colleagues who've worked in like around the American Revolution, things like that. But that's his area. So I knew I wanted an artifact from that period. And yeah,
hmm
I could have gone Ark of the Covenant. I feel like that might be treading on some pretty classically done material. Um, but in looking for artifacts that had an interesting history and went missing,
hmm
um, when I hit upon the menorah, I was just it just knocked me out how many hypotheses there are about what the hell happened to it.
hmm
Because there's certain things we know happened to it, right? We know that Titus took it from the temple when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. We know it went back to Rome. It's on the Ark of Titus.
hmm
It's inscribed in stone, right? Two
Doesn't get more
soldiers
real than
carrying,
that.
yeah, exactly. Two soldiers carrying this giant menorah. We know it was put into effectively a museum along with
hmm
other war spoils as a treasure, a Roman treasure. Um, and it sat there for several hundred years. So there's a tourist who references seeing it before the Vandals sack Rome.
hmm
I think Greek. I keep meaning to look that up because I don't want to get the fact wrong. But saw the menorah, wrote about it in his notes, his travel log, um, and that's the last written record we have of it.
Okay.
Is that tourist's notes in his travel log? Um, and it's just never heard from again. It's never written. Nobody ever commented on it.
hmm
So a lot of people think, okay, well, it was probably just picked up by the Vandals when they sacked Rome, taken to Carthage, where they took all of the spoils of Rome, and probably melted down for coins, which
hmm
might have happened,
Yeah.
but we don't have any evidence of that.
hmm
It's also possible that Belisarius, after he sacked Carthage, took it back to Constantinople.
hmm
Uh, that's also possible. it has also been hypothesized that it went back to Constantinople and then went back to Jerusalem and was uh, hidden in the basement of the Nea Ecclesia Church in Jerusalem. But we don't know that either.
Hmm.
So when I read about all this, I thought, that's fantastic. Because without giving any spoilers, I knew I wanted an object which had multiple possible points at which it surfaced.
Hmm. I again just love that it's something different. It's not the
Mhm.
atypical, and also it feels just rich in the history of that world. I think that often when we look at history, it tends to narrow in on this is Constantinople, this is Rome. It's easy to forget the whole system that
Mhm.
was that Mediterranean area. To your point on Carthage, I didn't know. I don't. There are moments I'm like, I am a well-read historical person, and I did not know the Vandals went to Carthage after sacking Rome. I just found it fascinating because Carthage, I had just read a book on like Carthage's rise and then fall against Rome and the Punic Wars. And
Mhm.
then after that, it basically just evaporates in historical, like general
Right.
zeitgeist.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating. And I, again, just love that it makes the world feel so full when we tend to think of the ancient world as Rome and then we just kind of Rome, Egypt, and pick like maybe two other places, and
Right.
it's ignored.
Yeah. And there's having picked the menorah, I then did lots of research that in preparation for writing the book that was, I mean, was just wild. That
Hmm.
I was fascinated by the relationship, the ongoing tumultuous relationship between the Jewish population
Yes.
and the Roman government, which
Hmm.
was, sometimes pretty tranquil, and other times really abhorrent. Um, and
Yeah.
that was fascinating. So I thought, wow, I really want to include that as a
Hmm.
thread through the story,
Hmm.
uh, because it felt disrespectful to
Yeah.
include the menorah as a MacGuffin without
Hmm.
including the cultural importance it had
Hmm.
and what that world was for the Jews in Constantinople.
Hmm.
Uh, and that led me to learn all about the chariot racing deems, and it's great.
Uh, First note is one of the things that I genuinely appreciate in the book is you do have this strong element of, I say strong element, there's a thread in the book about the Jewish relationship with the world at large, back then and in the present.
Mhm.
And there's that part that almost sticks in your throat when you realize that unfortunately a lot of the same prejudices of that time still carry into today's day and age,
Mhm.
especially given the context of where we're at in 2025, that this is still prevalent and
Yeah.
real. My second comment is, was there a historical fact that you learned that you desperately wanted to add to the book, but could not find a way to crowbar in?
Oh, one that couldn't be crowbarred in? That's a good question.
We can go with what your favorite one you crowbarred in was too.
Yeah. Yeah, because I definitely crowbarred something in. Uh, so my favorite thing that I did crowbar in, which wasn't entirely necessary to include in the story, but I loved it so much I couldn't resist.
Hmm.
Um, I really wanted to show the racetrack. I really wanted to
Hmm.
show what that racetrack was like. And
Hmm.
the chariot racer who's featured in that scene was a real guy.
Oh,
And the
that's so
stories that are
cool.
told about him, those are historical record. He was a terrible human being. It was as though Michael Jordan, right? As though Michael Jordan had also led attacks and like basically a mini pogrom against the Jews in another city on
Hmm.
tour. Like
Hmm.
this was a real event. That's crazy. Um, so I
Hmm.
really wanted to include the racing in the story.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was fascinating to me that when I was doing that research, learning about the racing and what it all meant at the time, that I came upon that the story that I wanted to fill in a moment, and
Hmm.
I found an article referenced from another article that was written by a Finnish professor, and I I wrote to him, and I still to this day I can't believe how generous he was. He wrote back to me within an hour and said, "I'm on holiday, but I'll get back to you as soon as I'm home," and sent me a PDF of the article in English.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is so cool.
it was so cool. Yeah. Um,
One of the things I do appreciate about you having the chariot scene there and talking about the athletes is again, it makes it feel more understandable and relatable to us because we have a tendency to obviously with history think, oh, that's the past. Those
right.
troglodytes, they're nothing like us today. But when you actually examine what life looked like back then, you go, actually, guess what? People are kind of the same no matter when
Yeah,
time happens.
yeah, yes, they are. Yeah, it's amazing how many elements of that do come up as it inevitably come up as you start to write about this period.
Hmm.
Uh, and you mentioned the fact that we still, in today's world, thousands of years later, are still dealing with the fact that the Jewish population worldwide
Hmm.
uh, deals with this, deals with these problems every day, um, and have been for thousands of years,
Hmm.
which is horrifying, um, and really tells you just how slow the pace of advancement can be, because it is history is just made up of a lot of little advances and a lot of big dropbacks.
Hmm. And that I think should be etched in stone on like the halls of learning is that one sentence.
Sadly.
Do you have a specific part of history that you would love to write about that's outside of the Mediterranean? Or are you already doing that? That might be a
That's it.
spoiler, but
No, I'd actually, I would actually, there are several stories which I would love to do with other, other
oh, that would
chronoarchaeologists.
be really cool.
Um,
Please turn this into a multiverse. This is what I want in fiction. I want this. I want more Splinter Effect in my life.
I'd like that to be etched somewhere.
We can
Um,
start selling t-shirts. It'll be great.
I love it. I love it. I think we should get Smithsonian Chronoarchaeology Department t-shirts.
Okay, you joke, but I would love to see like the what the challenge coin because like that floats around with like all these military thriller books. I would love to see like what the challenge coin or memento thing for Splinter Effect would be with like the Smithsonian Chrono Archaeological Department
Yeah,
as like the
with the
insignia.
seal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just subtly on a t-shirt.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be good.
Give
Now
me
I
the
want
logo. I'll turn into a mug for myself. Add to the collection.
perfect. Um, I lost track of the question.
Other periods in history
Oh, other periods of
outside of
history.
the Mediterranean.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I mentioned that Daiichi is a character who comes up
Hmm.
early in the book as a friend of Rabbit's and a former colleague in graduate school is because I thought, "Ah, I'd love to write a period during the shogunate."
Yes.
Um, but I also feel like, I don't know that I'm the right person to write that.
Fair.
I'd love to tell a story about African history.
Hmm.
I don't feel that I'm the writer to tell that.
Fair also.
Yeah, so these are the kind of things where I think, I don't know how these things work or how they evolve, but if this became something where another author said, "Hey, I'd like to write a story or a series of stories about another chronoarchaeologist in this world,"
Hmm.
that would delight me. But I feel like those are areas that I can't.
Hmm.
I just shouldn't be the one to write. Now I
Hmm.
feel like I could write about historical America,
Hmm.
Europe, the Mediterranean, but I feel
Hmm.
like that's kind of as far as I can realistically go myself.
And that's fair. It's good to also draw boundaries on what you do and do not want to write about.
Mhm.
Especially when you start putting time travel into the equation, you literally have an unlimited amount of space and time that you could conceivably write about. And the issue is saying no, setting boundaries, because otherwise it's far too easy to start spinning your wheels into countless knows places.
Right, right, right. Well, the other part to that is I very consciously made the choice at the beginning of writing the series that I did not want this to be a an episode of the week
Hmm.
series. I love some of those. Not that it's not a criticism, but I don't want to write something where, every book is a self-contained mission,
Hmm.
and at the end, everybody goes home and is happy. So I started from the beginning. I knew this was going to be a closed series.
Hmm.
So right now it's likely going to be 4 books that tells the arc of Rabbit's story. Um, and it will be a continuous
Okay.
story that evolves and grows and gets more complex. So
I'm very excited. Uh, what a first book and a first pilot should really be is something that makes the reader, the viewer, want to tune in again and again. Tells you what it is, sets up who the characters are, and you have done a phenomenal job of that with Splinter Effect. These are the books that, like I said, I want more of. I'm not a big sci-fi guy, in complete and utter honesty. But because of the way you have structured this book, because of the way you've told the story, I am here and I want more of it.
that's fantastic. Yeah,
Uh,
it's not hard sci-fi by
mhm,
any means. I mean, it is about as light a touch as I could do, and even
mhm,
with that, I tried to wrap that sci-fi element in so much that is recognizable and
mhm.
um, realistic. What I really want is for people to read those, the introduction, the first act, and feel like, oh yeah, yeah, that happens. That seems right.
Well, and I also appreciate that you structure the way that you make time travel work in this story is it's stuff that's lost.
Mhm.
Because for so much, I remember I saw an article on like the lost books of history because I thought, wow, well, that's like, fascinating that there is a third. Homer wrote a comedy and it disappeared. And
Yep.
I am so mad that I am not going to see the comedic version of whatever he had to write because that would be amazing.
Yeah.
We have the Odyssey, the Iliad, and then the comedy.
And I would almost be better if it was bad comedy.
Yes.
It
Like
just wasn't his thing.
cringy stand up, like
Yes.
just Homer making cringy stand up for like in iambic pentameter would be the greatest thing ever. But
Very
there's
true.
stuff like that that's lost to history.
Hmm.
And being able to use this series to examine or find those lost things is
Hmm.
fascinating. Again, I think it's just such a great premise because then you also aren't I think this is a difficulty I feel when I read some historical fiction is okay, but you're muddying up history to a certain extent, depending on where you place characters. And
Right.
because of the way you've structured it, they can't muddy history. It's impossible. That it just I love it. It's beautiful. Thank you. Like I said, wild enthusiasm for this book.
I I'm very happy. Thank you.
I also wanted to ask you, do you have a writing routine? And if so, what does it look like?
I absolutely do. When I had been a screenwriter in my younger days after I quit acting.
Hmm.
I did some screenwriting, sold a couple screenplays with my writing partner,
Hmm.
and that was great, lovely. They're sitting on a shelf somewhere unmade. Um,
Thank you,
and
Hollywood.
yeah, and I didn't really write much
Hmm.
for years. Um, and then it, my wife recounted this to me recently, actually. Her memory's very good, so I
It's
trust her.
incredible how women have a habit of this incredible long memory of
I
things that
know.
you've forgotten and sometimes would rather have forgotten.
Yeah, yeah. She recently described this to me, and she said that we had been in a conversation and I was being, in her words, I'm sure, let's just cut in her words,
In her words.
fussy, fussy. I was being fussy. And she said, "What do you need? What do you need to get out of this funk?"
Hmm.
And this part I do remember. I said, "I want to write a book." And she said, "Okay, what do you need to write a book?" And I arbitrarily said an hour a day. I'm I am with my wife. I am famous for making these sorts of proclamations um,
Hmm.
about what I need without thinking about it at all. And but I did, and I said an hour a day, and she said, "Okay, I'll make that happen." And ever since then, from from 5:30, 5:40 in the morning till about 6:40, we work out
Hmm.
together, and then I write from then until I get ready for my day job.
That's
And
awesome.
so it's an hour a day.
Hmm.
I think I skipped a day when I had COVID.
Hmm. You're allowed
Um,
to for COVID. It's an excusable reason.
yeah, but that's about it. So it's every morning, an hour a day, and it's amazing how much you can
Hmm.
do in 365 hours.
It is so true. The number one thing is consistency across, because I've asked this question, obviously, a lot of different authors, different
Yeah,
creatives, and no matter what their process or system is, consistency is the only thing that really matters because that's how you keep momentum and keep things moving.
yeah, yeah. There's do you know the pianist Paderewski,
No.
who's a very famous Polish pianist who toured the world, and he did these concerts where he was played the piano so ferociously that his fingers would bleed.
Wow.
He was an incredibly popular pianist. I think he actually became president of Poland as well.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, um, and he once said in an interview, if I don't practice for a day, I notice it.
Mm,
If I don't practice for 2 days, the critics notice it. If I don't practice for 3 days, the fans notice it.
mm,
And I think about that, that first one. If I don't practice for a day, I notice it. It's really true.
hmm.
If I that day that I had to skip because of COVID, I came back and like, where was I? What was I doing? Yeah, consistency really is important.
Hmm. Andrew, this has been a delightful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I'm going to yet again tell people get Splinter Effect. It is a great book. I am so excited. Uh, when I heard that there was going to be more Splinter Effect series books, I was like, oh, thank goodness. Because this is what happens when I read a book this good and I see it's a debut author and this is the first one in what hopefully could be a series. I'm like, oh, please, God, let it sell well enough that there's going to be more of them. So I'm excited to hear that there's another book on the way, and I'm looking forward to reading every installment of Splinter Effect.
Thank you very much. March 17th, 2026, Double Shadow will come
I
out.
will I will be marking my calendar. I will be there. I will order signed copies. Andrew, where can people go to learn more about you, your work, and Splinter Effect?
AndrewLudington.com has it's not a lot of information, but it has some information, including things about upcoming in-person events, things like that. If anyone in the Midwest would like a signed copy.
I will
Also,
show up with my book.
yeah, there you go. Perfect. Also, if people would like to get a signed copy of the book, the local bookstore in my neighborhood, which is called Squeezebox Books and Records,
Hmm.
terrific locally owned bookstore. Um, I'll work with them to sign a copy, and they'll send it.
Oh, that's awesome. Andrew, thanks again for coming on the show. We'll link everything in the show notes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.